Hey everyone, so we need to keep working on chapter 20 and look a little bit more into the heart. So what I'm going to do is just jump right to our PowerPoint. And where we left off was talking about this thing called stroke volume. And stroke volume is the amount of blood that's being pumped out of the heart. All right, and remember, I mentioned that there's three things that are going to affect how much blood is pumped out of the heart, or the heart stroke volume. That is this thing called preload. Then we have the contractility of the heart, and then we have afterload. So this video is going to focus on these three things, and I want to talk a little bit about them. Now, to start with, we've got this preload. And preload is a stretch that the heart does prior to contracting. And so it says, according to this Frank Starling law of the heart, the greater the stretch, or the greater this preload, the greater the contraction. And I know we talked about this in class, and I mentioned how the heart can overstretch and how preload is going to equalize the amount of blood that's being pumped on the left side of the heart versus the right side of the heart. All right? So I just wanted to review that really quick and give you preload, because it's one of the three. Then the second type of influence is this thing called afterload. Afterload is the blood pressure that the circulatory system has, that the heart has to overcome to push the blood out of the way as the heart pumps blood out of the ventricles. So this blood pressure is called afterload. And it says in congestive heart failure, if we have a high afterload, more blood remains in the heart, and that can lead to overstretching, which leads to a higher preload, which can cause this positive feedback system to occur. All right? And it says if our left side of the heart fails, we call that pulmonary edema, because it's affecting our lungs. We get fluid on the lungs. And if the right side of the heart is failing, we get what's called peripheral edema, which is fluid buildup on the body side, so our ankles, legs can swell up. This is because the blood's just sitting there and the fluid in the blood moves out into the tissue. Now, we've got a couple of handouts that are going to talk about the contractility regulation. So our heart stroke volume can also be regulated by the nervous system and by the hormones, the endocrine system. So we're going to start with handout 20D, and I want to go over this briefly with you. So let's put it up here on the screen. I'm going to kind of zoom in, and then I'll go through this. To do this, I'll get rid of myself. Maybe. There we go. I'm out. And we're going to start here with the brain. And the brain has a section in the brain stem called the Medulla Oblongata. Now, the Medulla Oblongata does not have anything to do with aggression. So don't believe the water boy. What it does is it has a regulatory center for heartbeat. So we call that center the cardiovascular center. Now, what this cardiovascular center of your medulla oblongata does is it sends signals to your heart. So I'm going to zoom out here. The cardiovascular center of the medulla oblongata is going to send either a sympathetic nerve response or a parasympathetic nerve response to the SA node of our heart. Now, if we need to speed the heart up, we send a sympathetic nerve response, and it actually goes through this nerve called the cardiac accelerator nerve, because it's going to speed up the heart. Then when we need to slow the heart down, we can send a different signal, what's called a parasympathetic signal, via the vagus nerve to the SA node, and that's going to slow your heart down. So the nervous system, remember, doesn't create the heartbeat, but it does regulate it. We can speed it up sympathetically. We can slow it down parasympathetically. Now, we haven't talked about the nervous system yet, but when you think of nerves, nerve responses or signals are either sympathetic or parasympathetic. They are opposites. So if sympathetic speeds it up, parasympathetic slows it down. All right? Now, how does the heart know to do this? Or how does the medulla oblongata know to do this for the heart? That's because the heart is pumping blood through our carotid arteries and our aorta, and these blood vessels have receptors that are determining what our blood pressure is, what our chemical levels are, and they are sending signals up to the medulla oblongata. So it turns out that the carotid arteries send signals via the glossopharyngeal nerve, and the aorta sends it via the vagus nerve. But these sensory nerves are coming up telling the medulla oblongata, hey, you got to speed up the heart, or hey, you got to slow the heart down. And then the medulla oblongata responds accordingly. And we have this nice circuitry system where if our blood pressure is too high, we send a signal to our medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata then sends a parasympathetic nerve response to slow our heart down. If our blood pressure is too low, opposite happens. We send a signal up to the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is going to speed up the heart by sending a sympathetic nerve response. Now, the top of this, these signals that are in the carotid artery and aorta can also affect our higher brain function. So our higher brain functions, the cerebrum is the thinking part of our brain, the limbic system's our emotions, and our hypothalamus, remember, is that, center of homeostasis. So the signals can also go through these parts of the brain, and then these parts of the brain can send a signal to the medulla oblongata to send the signal down to the heart. Now, just think like your emotions. When you get really emotional, this part of the brain called the limbic system deals with your emotions. When you get really emotional, this limbic system can send signals to your medulla oblongata that may speed up your heart. So you may get this sympathetic nerve response because you're very emotional. Same thing with the thinking part. You can calm yourself down. You can talk yourself down and relax. So the cerebrum is doing the same thing. So this is handout 20D, and it's showing us the nerve regulation of the heartbeat. All right? So we have one other thing to mention, which is hormone regulation. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh man, every time he shows a handout with hormones, things get crazy. This is actually one of the easier hormones. So let's switch to handout 20E. And I'm going to cover up part of it, and I'm going to zoom in. But it's going to start off just like what we've seen in the past, where we've got the hypothalamus with the pituitary gland, except in this case, there's no hormone here. All right, so it says in purple there that the hypothalamus is going to send a nervous signal down to our adrenal glands. There's no hormone. So there's no hormone coming from this hypothalamus, which is different than what we've learned with oxytocin and prolactin and human growth hormone. They've all had a hormone that's being released out of the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. In this case, a nerve signal is going to travel down your spinal cord from the hypothalamus to your adrenal glands. And your adrenal glands sit on your kidneys, and the adrenal glands are going to make, well, what we commonly call adrenaline, but the hormone is not called adrenaline. The hormone is called, well, there's actually two, called epinephrine and norepinephrine. So we get a nerve signal coming down to our adrenal glands. That tells the adrenal glands to produce epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine and norepinephrine is collectively called adrenaline. Now, what does adrenaline do? Well, it stimulates your SA node to cause those action potentials to speed up. So the heart speeds up, stimulates our heart. Now, the carotid arteries and the aorta have chemoreceptors, chemical receptors, that pick up the amounts of epinephrine and norepinephrine. So when we don't need our heart sped up anymore, the carotid artery sends a nerve signal back up to shut this all down. And we stop sending the signal to make the adrenaline, and this whole thing will shut off. Now, this takes longer than a nerve response, because when we produce the adrenaline, the epinephrine and norepinephrine, it's going to flow through the bloodstream. So you've got this surge of adrenaline going through your bloodstream, and even when we turn it off, there's still some in our blood until our liver breaks it down. And so it's going to keep your heart beating faster for a longer period of time. When we think about the other handout, Handout 20D, this happens really fast, right? We can send a fast signal to speed up our heart, and then we can send another fast signal to slow it down. But the hormones, they work much slower. So it takes a few minutes to make the hormone and then get it going. And then it's going to take a few minutes to shut that hormone off and then break it down in the liver and recycle it so it's no longer in our bloodstream. And so these are the two regulatory processes, all right? So that takes care of handouts 20D and 20E. All right, so we've got one more video to wrap this up. Watch that video, and then this chapter is over, and we're ready for our test. All right, I'll see you in class. Have a wonderful day.